Welcome Naresh IT, this is Mahesh. So in our last videos we discussed how to develop our first RESTful web service application, and we deployed the application, and we tested, so which is working fine, right? So quickly we'll see what we discussed in the last class. So basically we implemented our RESTful web service implemented by using the JET-C implementation, and this is what the test service we created for testing purpose to identify whether service is working or not, right? So we deployed the service and we tested the service is working fine, and this is what the path we configured. Basically up to this second ticket is a project name we configured, so up to this one is called as a context path we called, right? So up to the second ticket or project name, it's a context path. After this context path, so what is this RS is nothing but, so in the real time applications, a single application will act as a web application as well as web service. Meaning the request is from browser, the web application will be invoked. If the request is from some other application, so we'll invoke the web service will invoke. So to identify that it's a web application request or web service request, so in the web.xml file we configured the path we configured in the web.xml. This RESTful service request will get from a path called /rs, meaning if any request is coming from rs, meaning it means that it's a web service request. So that's why you configured in the path we configured /rs. Then after that, so first initially all your web service request will be go to a servlet. What is a servlet name is nothing but servlet container is a servlet. So first initially all the web service requests will go to this particular servlet container class. From there, based on the path what we configured, it will invoke that particular class will be invoked. So this particular test is a class we configured this test class we configured for a class yesterday we created called test class. See here, by using this path annotation, we configured this path we configured /test, meaning if any request which is coming from /test, invoke this particular class we configured, right? Now after that, the class can contain n number of methods. How we are identifying a method is nothing but by using, again for each and every method we configured the path we configured. So if the request is coming from test, this particular test class will be invoked. Inside the test class for each and every method we are giving a path we are assigning. So if the request is coming from /test/hi, this particular say hi method will be called. So yesterday, just for testing purpose, the service is working or not, we created the service we tested the services which is working fine. So today in this video what we will discuss is nothing but we will discuss JAX-RS, injection. We'll discuss a concept called what? JAX-RS injection concept we'll discuss. So what is this JAX-RS injection is nothing but, basically in the web services communication there will be two actors. What are the two actors in the web service is nothing but, one is a web service provider and second thing is web service consumer. So what we will discuss in this JAX-RS injection is nothing but how the consumer is going to send the data to provider, how the consumer will send the data to provider, how the consumer will inject or send the data to provider. That thing is we call as a JAX-RS injection we call. So there are different ways to inject this data from client to provider, and the JAX-RS, yesterday we already seen that it's annotations, it will work on a methodology, annotations methodology it will work, so it's very easy for us to work with the annotations and all. So what are the different approaches to send the data from client to provider or consumer to provider is nothing but, the first approach we are having called path parameter. The first approach to inject the data or send the data is nothing but at path parameter is one approach to inject the data, and one more approach to inject the data is nothing but query parameter is another approach. Query parameter is another approach to send the data, and one more approach is nothing but matrix parameter is another approach of sending the data, matrix parameter. And so one more thing is nothing but form parameter, which is used to send the data from a form. Next thing is nothing but header parameter. Header param is annotation for sending the header parameters. So bean parameter is another approach of sending the data. So path parameters, query parameter, matrix parameter, form, header parameter, bean parameter and a cookie parameter. Okay. So, these are the different approaches of send the data, I mean how the client application is going to inject or send the data to the provider. So, we will see the first approach we will see here. What is that one is nothing but path parameter, meaning how the consumer is going to send the data to provider by using what? Path parameters. So, yesterday we created a project we created, just we created test service we created. Actually what is the project name we created? If you see this project, if you see here, we created a project we created called second ticket is a project we created, meaning a client application is going to send the tickets. Let us say for example you have some ticket, like now you booked a ticket in Book My Show, but unfortunately today, let us take today evening at 6 o'clock you have a show, but unfortunately you have some other work, so you are not able to attend, you are not able to go to that movie, let us take. So, there is no option to cancel the ticket, right? You want to sell the ticket, you want to sell. So, just we are developing a small application kind of thing we are developing. So, basically the user can upload the ticket. Let us say I have a ticket, I do not have an option to cancel the ticket. So, basically what user will do is nothing but user is going to use our second ticket application, he is going to upload the ticket in the application. If any users wants to buy the ticket, they can buy the ticket and they will pay the money to you. Basically that is what the project we are developing. I mean we are learning the RESTful web service concepts we are learning, as well as we are developing a small project also we are developing. So, provider required some information. What is the information is nothing but what is a ticket name, whether it is a movie ticket or bus ticket or train ticket, what kind of ticket it is. The second thing is nothing but the city of the ticket, where you book the ticket, let us take in Hyderabad or Bangalore, where is the location. Next we require the information like what is the timing, what is the date, like these kind of information we require, right. So, simply we will create one, let us assume that you are going to maintain this data, you are going to maintain in the database. In the coming classes we will create the database, we will write the database logic and all. Just as of now, we will assume the structure, okay, this is what the structure I want to maintain in my database. So, what is required for us? We require the ticket type is required. First thing we require the ticket type information is required. What kind of ticket, it is a bus or train or what kind of ticket it is. Next, what is the date of the ticket we required? In case of it is a movie, what is the date when you book that, the date we required, as well as we required what? The time information is also required, and we required the other information like what is a, let us take name, whether it says for example if it is a movie ticket, what is a movie ticket name, right. So, what is the next thing is required? The location, in which particular city you book the ticket, that location information also required, as well as how much money you want to sell the ticket, right, for how much money you want to sell the ticket, even the price is also required, okay. So, as of now we will assume that these are the data I required from my client application. These are the data I required, what the client application is going to send, this data client application is going to send. So, ticket type, what is the date, time, name, location, as well as price. So, our application has to provide the services to other applications to send this information. Let us say for example, your application is popular, second ticket application is most popular. In future, Make My Trip or this Paytm, you want to provide these services to these applications, meaning any person can log in into Make My Trip and they can upload the ticket information to your application. See, you are providing these services, you are providing to the other applications, meaning like Make My Trip or Paytm, like these kind of applications we are providing as services. So, other applications is going to use our services what we created, okay. So, okay, I want to maintain this information, I want to maintain my server side database like ticket type, what is the date, time, name, location and price. Now, the question comes, how you are going to receive the data from your client application. One of the approach of receiving the data from our consumer or client application is nothing but, what is that one? Path parameter. So, now we will see here how to receive the data by using what? Path parameter. For this, I am creating a new Java class I am creating. Yesterday we created this test class for testing purpose. I am creating one more Java class I am creating under this package in our Java resources This is what the package we created, nit.secondTicket. In this package, I am creating one more Java file I am creating under this package, a new Java class. I am creating a class I am creating here. I created a Java class I am creating here called secondTicketInfo is a class name we specified. We specified a class name called what? secondTicketInfo is a class name we specified. So first of all, to invoke this particular class, actually what we had to do is nothing but we had to give an identifier we had to give. So how we are going to give that identifier to identify this particular class is nothing but by using an annotation called @path annotation. By using an annotation called @path annotation, we'll configure the path we'll configure by using which when the request is came from which particular path you want to invoke this class, we had to configure that path we had to configure. Let's say I am configuring the path I am configuring /st, meaning if any request which is coming from this /st invoke this particular class. A single class can contain n number of method, or in the RESTful service terminology that each and every method we called as a resource we called. That's what we already discussed in the last class. So what we are going to give to your client applications is nothing but we are going to give the resources, but or in our Java terminology you can consider each and every method you can consider as a resource. A method can return any type of data, right? It can be a plain text, or it can be HTML, it can be XML, it can be JSON, it can be image, or it can be video, it can be a JPG file, it can be anything. So basically in our Java terminology, a resource is nothing but a method. We are exposing that resources we are exposing to our client application. Ultimately, your client or application is going to access the resources. Okay. So let's take for example, we had to create a method we had to create which consumes the data, the ticket information, which consumes the ticket information from our consumer application. So I'm creating one method I'm creating here. Let's take public. I'm specifying the return type of this method I'm specifying as a string is the return type of this method I'm specifying. So return type of this method we are specifying as what? The method is returning the string value the method is returning, and I'm creating a method called receive ticket info is the method name we specified. We are creating one method we created. What is the method name? Receive ticket info is the method name we created. Fine. The method has to return some string value. We'll return that string value will return later. Okay, this if the request is coming from this particular path /st, we are invoking this particular class we are invoking, but the class contains n number of methods, right? So how you are going to identify this particular method? I want to call this particular method I want to call. So for this one also we are going to configure annotation called what? @path annotation will configure. @path. What is the path I am giving for this method is nothing but I am giving a path for this method called insert. Insert path is the name we configured for this method. @path is the annotation. For this annotation we configured the path called insert path, meaning if any request which is coming from this particular path, let's take up to this context path is same up to second ticket. After the context path, there are two classes are there now in our project. One is test is one thing, one more thing is nothing but second ticket info is another class. To call this second ticket info class, we configured the path we configured. What is the path we configured? st. Okay. So in this context path, let's see here, to invoke this particular class, what is the path we had to configure now? After this context path, to identify it's a web service request, we had to specify /rs. After that, to identify that second ticket info class, we had to give the path as st. Next, inside that second ticket info class, there may be a lot of methods, but to identify this particular method, we given the path as what? Insert path is a method we configured. So here to call this method, what you have to specify? Insert path we have to specify. So this will be called as a URL, or this can be called as a URI also you can call. This can be meaning after your context path /rs/st or insert path, this can be called as a URL or it can be called as a URI. So the client application is required. What client application is required to invoke this particular service what we created? The client application is required this URL or URI is required to invoke this particular resource or to invoke this particular method. Fine, we given an identifier we given to identify this method. If the request is coming from this particular path, invoke this method. Next, what kind of request it is, you have to specify, because ultimately our RESTful service will work on top of HTTP protocol, right? When you are making a request on HTTP protocol, we are having some different request types like GET request, POST request, PUT request, delete request, right? When you are retrieving some data, we have to use a GET request. When you are uploading some data or sending the data, we have to use a POST request we have to use. When you are performing you are sending some data, but you are performing the update operation you are performing at the server end, you have to perform the PUT request you have to specify. When you are performing some delete operation and you are performing user delete request, we have to use, right? So here, just it's a GET request I am specifying here, okay. So let's specify the request type here. I am specifying as a GET request. Next thing is nothing but we have to specify, okay, we configured what is the identifier to identify this method. We configured what is the request type also we configured. Next thing what you have to specify is nothing but what type of data this particular method or resource is giving to your consumer application. Consumer is going to send the data, right? The method is going to invoke and the client is going to send the data, or consumer is going to send the data. What kind of data the particular method is returning, we have to configure that one. So see here what we configured, it's returning what type of data? String type of data it's returning here. As of now, there is an annotation to specify that what type of data the method is returning. What is that annotation is nothing but at produces is a annotation. But make sure when you are using this at produces annotation, in multiple packages this at produces annotation is there. One thing is there in the javax.enterprise.inject package, one more thing is there in the javax.ws.rs package. So we had to take a annotation which is there from javax.ws.rs package at produces, and you have to specify what type of data it is producing. As of now we want to produce some plain text we want to produce, like just success or fail kind of thing message we want to produce. So simply we specified a produces. There is a class we are having called media type is a class. That media type class contains the variables, I mean the constants it contains, which is holding all the different types of data like JSON, XML, like these kind of type of data you can specify. Media type dot you can specify here. See, I told you it's having different constants of data types. You can specify here application underscore JSON, application underscore XML and all. So now we are returning the plain text we are returning as of now. So choose a type called text underscore plain we have to select, because we are returning the plain text we are returning. So let's choose text underscore plain. Fine, we create a method we created called receive ticket information. We configured the path to identify the method, request type we configured, and we specified what type of data we are producing also we specified. But where we are receiving the data, basically we created this method we created to receive some data from our consumer, right? But are you receiving any data we are receiving here? No, we are not receiving the data here, right? Now we will write that code we will write to receive that data in the form of the first approach. The first approach in this JAX-RS injection, that is nothing but the path parameters. So how you are going to receive the data in the form of path parameters, we will see. See here, to receive the path parameters, this is what the information you want to receive. What is the ticket type, date, time, name, location, as well as price, right? See here, how you are going to configure the path parameters is, after this path, you can specify this slash. The first thing I want to receive that information, the first thing is nothing but I want to insert ticket type I want to insert. The first thing, what is the information you want to receive? The ticket type information you want to receive. This is the first parameter we want to receive from our consumer, ticket type. Slash. Next, what is the next information we want to receive is nothing but we want to receive what is the date, okay. So I specified date underscore, and one more thing is nothing but slash. One more parameter also we want to receive. What is that one is nothing but time also we want to receive, okay. So date is one thing, one more thing is what? Time. Next, What's the next information you want to receive? Date, ticket type, date, time, name, location and price. So, let us configure the path. What is the name slash, next what is the location slash, what is the price. So, see here, after this particular request, meaning in which format the consumer has to send the data to provider is nothing but to identify this particular resource. We configured earlier, we configured the path we configured. If the request is coming from this particular path, invoke this method, we configured like that. Now, we configured here after this path. So, the first parameter whatever we are receiving after this resource name, that is considered as a ticket type. Next, after that, whatever the parameter value we got, consider that one as a date type, time type. So, when the consumer is sending the data, how the consumer has to send the data is nothing but after this context path, RS to identify the web service request, ST to identify that second ticket info class name, insert path is a path we configured to identify the method, slash how the consumer has to send the data I am configuring here. Let us say you want to configure the ticket type. The ticket type is nothing but it is a movie ticket. I configure the ticket type as movie I configured. What is the next thing we had to configure? Date we had to configure, next thing. Let us say I configured the date, it is a 1st March, I configured 01, 03, okay, hyphen. So, we configure the date also we configured. Next we had to configure what is the time. I configured 6 p.m. is the time I configured. Like this, the consumer has to send the data, consumer has to send. The next thing we configured what is a movie name. I configured something name I configured, something I configured the name I configured like this. What is the location? It is there in Hyderabad. And what is the price of this? I configured 200 I configured. So, how the client application has to send the data is nothing but the client application has to send the data like this, the client application has to send the data. Okay. Sometimes I am using client and sometimes I am using consumer. Okay. So, terminology may be different, but the meaning is same. I told you in the web service communication there will be two actors, one is a provider, one more thing is consumer, or it can be called as a client or server is one thing, one more thing is nothing but client. So, terminology may be different, but try to understand the concept. So, client application is going to send the data in this form, the client application is going to send the data. But see here, okay, the client application is going to send the data in this form, client application is going to send the data. But how to read the data in this method? Because ultimately we want to receive this data, we want to receive and we want to store the data, we want to store into database. But how the method is receiving the data? I want to get the information, what is the ticket type, what is the date, what is the time, I want to get the information I want to get. And I told you the first approach of sending the data is nothing but inject the data is nothing but at path parameter. But are you configured anywhere this at path parameter, are you configured anywhere? No. Now let us see here. In this particular method, we had to configure an annotation called inside this method called at path parameter. Configure at path parameter, one annotation is there. We had to configure the parameter we had to configure. Meaning I am telling that in this particular URL, I am receiving some path parameters I am receiving in this particular URL. What is that parameter name is nothing but the first parameter name we configured, right? What is the parameter name we configured here? Ticket type is our first parameter. The first parameter what we are receiving is nothing but ticket type. So, this name we had to configure here in the at path parameter annotation. Let us configure what is the parameter name we are receiving. At path parameter ticket type and specify what is the variable name for this. I am giving some name called ticket type I specified. And what is this type is nothing but it is a string type, it is a string type we configured, type is specified. Okay. So, meaning we are telling in this particular statement whatever the data I am receiving in the first parameter, the ticket type, right. So, that ticket type value I am telling that store into a string variable called what? Type. In a same way we had to configure the remaining Remaining parameters also we had to configure. Let's configure at path parameter annotation, at path parameter, configure the parameter name. So, date underscore is a parameter name. What is the type? We can use as a date type, we can specify, or to make it simple, I am considering this date type as a string type only, I am considering here string. Let us configure for all the parameters, we will configure. At path parameter, time underscore is a parameter name, and this parameter I want to store into a variable, string variable. Okay. So, let us configure the remaining parameters also. Time is the next parameter, one more parameter is name we are receiving, name. Okay. So, in the form of path parameters, we are receiving the data we are receiving from our consumer application, we are receiving the data we are receiving. So, now the method is receiving total the 6 parameters the method is receiving. So, once the data is received, you can write the database logic, you can write this database logic, you can write to put this data into what? Database. We will see, we will write that one in the coming class, we will write that one. As of now, just for our understanding purpose, whether the data is received or not, just for our understanding purpose, I am printing this message, I am printing on the log system.out.println. So, whatever the data we received, just I am printing on the log, I am printing here. What is the type? So, type I am printing here, next date I am printing, time, next what is the name, next, so what is the location and what is the price. Just inside this method what I am doing is, whatever the parameters we received, whatever the data we received in the form of path parameters, I am printing the data, I am printing on the console, I am printing the data. But we specified the return type of this method is string is the return type we specified, right. Okay, look, we will add a small condition, we will add here. What is that one is nothing but if all are not equals to null, then only we will print this value, we will print. If type is not equals to null, as well as, meaning all these variables are not equals to null, then only we will print these values, we will print and we will return the status as success, otherwise we will return the status as fail, we will return. Okay. So, type is one thing, next date, time, name, location and price. If all these variables are not equals to null, then what we are doing is nothing but we are printing this system.out.println statement, we are printing on the console, and we will write a return statement, we will write that is return success. Okay. Because we specified the method return type is specified as a string we specified, right. Just we received the data and we are returning the message as success if all are not equals to null. If any one variable you specified null, meaning you have not inserted, you have not given the data for that one, you will get the variable type as what? Null you will get, right. In the else block, what I am doing is nothing but I am returning a message called fail. Okay. See, this is what our a method we created, this is what the method we created, or we created a resource we created to receive the data from our consumer application. These are the 6 parameters we are receiving. So, and we are storing those 6 parameters, we are storing into these 6 local variables we are storing. We are printing the variable values we are printing here, and if all are not equals to null, we are returning success, otherwise simply we are returning the message called fail. Fine. So, we created one method we created, right. Now, we will test this method, we will create whether the method or resource is accepting the data from the consumer application or not, we will check. Okay. So, let us deploy the application on the server, right click on this project, second ticket, run on server. I am installing this app on the Tomcat 9, I am installing this app. So, our app is deployed, our application is deployed. Now, we will make a request, we will make, this is what the context path, right, this is what the context path. Next, to identify our web service request, we configured in the web.xml that URL is going to come from /rs. So, we are telling that it is a web service request it is. See, we are testing this web service, we are testing in the browser itself, we are testing. Okay. So, we will see in the, because it is a GET request we specified, we are not giving header parameters and all. So, you can test in the browser, you can test. But the coming examples, if you are using a post request or if you are sending any header parameters, cookie parameters like these kind of thing, we cannot test in the browser, you cannot test. So, we are going to use some testing tools, we are going to use like Postman, a Swagger, a SOAP UI, like these kind of testing tools we are going to use in the coming classes to test our web services. Okay. So, as of now it is a GET request, so you can test in the browser only, it is a GET request, there is no any header parameters and all, there is no cookie parameters. We can test the request, you can test in the browser only, you can test, right, fine. So, we specified this after context path, RS we specified to represent it's a web service request. After that, there are two classes are available in our web services right now. To identify this particular second ticket class, what is the path we configured? ST is the path we configured to identify that second ticket class. Inside that second ticket class, there can be n number of methods. To identify that method, we configured the path we configured for this method called insert path is a URL we configured. So, here what you have to specify here, after this ST, let us configure insert path. This insert path we configured to identify that particular method, but the method is taking total 6 parameters and we configured in the form of form parameters. So, after this path, the first we had to send the type we had to send. I am sending the type I am sending, it is a movie is the type I specified. Next we had to specify what is the date we had to specify, and specifying the date it is 01-03-2018, it is a date. Next we had to configure the time we had to configure, right. I am configuring 6 p.m. is the time I am configuring. Next, the next thing we had to specify what is the name we had to configure here. We had to configure that movie name we had to configure. I specified some movie name called Bagmati is the name I configured. Next, after that we had to specify what is the location I had to specify. I am specifying it is Hyderabad /. Next we had to configure what is the price. I configured the price called 200 is the price I configured. So, these are path parameters. We are sending these values, we are sending, the method is receiving that path parameters, the method is receiving. If everything is fine, when you click on this enter, or when you will get a message called success, otherwise you will get a message called fail. Success, we got the success message we got, meaning our service is working fine what we created, and our web service is receiving the data in the form of path parameters, it is receiving the data. See, so as of now we are printing the data, we are printing on the console we are printing. See, once you received the data, right, storing the data in the database server is not too difficult. That is a basic your Java concepts, if you know JDBC and all, that is not too difficult to store the data in the database, right. Only the thing we have to understand in the web services, RESTful service is nothing but how you are going to consume the data from a consumer. A consumer application can be either it can be a Java, .NET, PHP, Python, Android, Ruby or iOS, it can be anything. How you are consuming the data from different applications, that is what we are understanding. So, once if you receive the data into your method, it is not too difficult of storing the data in the database, right. So, what we discussed in this video is nothing but we discussed how to inject the data to the RESTful web services. There are different approaches of injecting the data to the RESTful web services, and one of the approach is nothing but path parameter. So, we seen an example, for demonstrating this path parameters. Okay. So, hope you understand. In the next video, we will see the remaining parameter types we will see in the next video. Okay. Thank you.